right, so next step, actually on this slide, is the need for policy. And so I'm going to start with a case study of what's one thing that gets companies to take action. And so, as I mentioned earlier, an investigator for the UN found that Facebook played a determining role in the Rohingya Genocide. I think the best article I've read on this was by Timothy McLaughlin, who did a super in-depth dive on Facebook's role in Myanmar. And people warned Facebook executives in 2013 and in 2014 and in 2015 how the platform was being used to spread hate speech and to incite violence. One person in 2015 even told Facebook executives that Facebook could play the same role in Myanmar that the radio broadcast played during the Rwandan genocide. And radio broadcast played a very terrible and kind of pivotal role in the Rwandan genocide. Somebody close to it said, that's not 2020 hindsight. The scale of this problem was significant and it was already apparent. And despite this, in 2015, I believe Facebook only had 4 contractors who even spoke Burmese, the language of Myanmar. Question?
That's an interesting one. How do you think about our opportunity to correct biases in artificial systems versus the behaviors we see in humans? For example, a sentencing algorithm can be monitored and adjusted versus a specific biased judge who remains in their role for a long time.
Theoretically, though, I think I feel a bit hesitant about it'll be easier to correct bias in algorithms because I feel like you still need people kind of making the decisions to prioritize that. Like it requires kind of an overhaul of the system's priorities, I think.
It also starts with the premise that there are people who can't be fired or disciplined or whatever,
Yeah.
which I guess maybe for some judges that's true, but that kind of maybe suggests that judges shouldn't be lifetime appointments.
Yeah, because I mean, even then, I think you kind of need the change of heart of the people advocating for the new system, which I think can would be necessary in other case, kind of, and that's kind of the critical piece of getting the people that are wanting to overhaul the values of a system. So returning to this issue of the Rohingya genocide, and this is a kind of continuing issue. This is something that's just kind of really stunning to me that there were so many warnings and that so many people tried to raise an alarm on this, and that so little action was taken. And even this was last year, Zuckerberg finally said that Facebook would add, or maybe this was probably 2 years ago, said that Facebook would add, but this is, after genocide's already happening, Facebook would add dozens of Burmese language content reviewers. So in contrast, we have this is how Facebook really failed to respond in any significant way in Myanmar. Germany passed a much stricter law about hate speech, DZ, and the potential penalty would be up to like 50 million euros. Facebook hired 1,200 people in under a year because they were so worried about this penalty. And so, and I'm not saying that like this is a law we want to replicate. Here I'm just illustrating the difference between being told that you're contributing or playing a determining role in a genocide versus a significant financial penalty. We have seen what the one thing that makes Facebook take action is. And so I think that is really significant in remembering what the power of a credible threat of a significant fine is, and it has to be a lot more than just like a cost of doing business. So I really believe that we need both policy and ethical behavior within industry. I think that policy is the appropriate tool for addressing negative externalities, misaligned economic incentives, race to the bottom situations, and enforcing accountability. However, ethical behavior of individuals and of data scientists and software engineers working in industry is very much necessary as well, because the law is not always going to keep up. It's not going to cover all the edge cases. We really need the people in industry to be making kind of ethical decisions as well. And so I believe both are significant and important. And something to note here is that many examples of kind of AI ethics issues, and I haven't talked about all of these, but there was Amazon's facial recognition. The ACLU did a study finding that it incorrectly matched 28 members of Congress to criminal mugshots, and this disproportionately included Congress people of color. There's also, this was a terrible article, the article was good, but the story is terrible, of a city that's using this IBM dashboard for predictive policing, and a city official said, whenever you have machine learning, it's always 99% accurate, which is false and quite concerning. We had the issue in 2016, ProPublica discovered that you could place a housing ad on Facebook and say, I don't want Latino or Black people, or I don't want wheelchair users to see this housing ad, which seems like a violation of the Fair Housing Act. And so there's this article, and Facebook was like, we're so sorry. And then over a year later, it was still going on. ProPublica went back and wrote another article about it. There's also this issue of dozens of companies were placing ads on Facebook, job ads, and saying, we only want young people to see this. There's the Amazon creating the recruiting tool that penalized resumes that had the word women's in it. And so something to note about these examples, and many of the examples we've talked about today, is that many of these are about human rights and civil rights. And it's a good article by Dominique Harrison of the Aspen Institute on this. And I kind of agree with Anil Dash's framing. He wrote, there is no technology industry anymore. Tech is being used in every industry. And so I think in particular, we need to consider human rights and civil rights, such as housing, education, employment, criminal justice, voting, and medical care, and think about what rights we want to safeguard. And I do think policy is the appropriate way to do that. And I think, it's very easy to be discouraged about regulation, but I think sometimes we overlook the positive or the cases where it's worked well. And so something I really liked about Data Sheets for Data Sets by Timnit Gebru et al. Is that they go through 3 case studies of how standardization and regulation came to different industries. So it's the electronics industry around circuits and resistors. And so that's kind of around the standardization of, what the specs are and what you write down about them. The pharmaceutical industry and car safety. And none of these are perfect, but it was a kind of very illuminating, the case studies there. And in particular, I got very interested in the car safety one. There's also a great 99% Invisible episode. This is a design podcast about it. And so some things I learned is that early cars had sharp metal knobs on the dashboard that could lodge in people's skulls in a crash. Non-collapsible steering columns would frequently impale drivers. And then even after the collapsible steering column was invented, it wasn't actually implemented because there was no economic incentive to do so. But it's the collapsible steering column has, they said, saved more lives than anything other than the seatbelt when it comes to car safety. And there was also this widespread belief that cars were dangerous because of the people driving them. And it took consumer safety advocates decades to just even change the culture of discussion around this, and to start kind of gathering and tracking the data, and to put more of an onus on car companies around safety. GM hired a private detective to trail Ralph Nader and try to dig up dirt on him. And so this was really a battle that we kind of I take for granted now. And so kind of shows how much it can take to change the needle there. And then a more recent issue is that it wasn't until, I believe, 2011 that it was required that crash test dummies start representing the average female anatomy, in addition to previously it was kind of just crash test dummies were like men, and that in a crash of the same impact, women were 40% more likely to be injured than men, because that's kind of who the cars were being designed for. So I thought all this was very interesting, and it can be helpful to kind of remember some of the successes we've had. And another area that's very relevant is environmental protections, and kind of looking back and Maciek Siglowski has a great article on this, but just remembering, like in the US, we used to have rivers that would catch on fire, and London had terrible smog, and that these are things that were would not have been possible to kind of solve as an individual. We really needed kind of coordinated regulation on. All right, and so then on a kind of closing note, so I think a lot of the problems I've touched on tonight are really huge and difficult problems, and they're often kind of very complicated. And I go into more detail in this in the course, so please check out the course once it's released. I always try to offer some like steps towards solutions, but I realize they're not always as satisfying as I would like. Of like, this is going to solve it, and that's because these are really difficult problems. And Julia Angwin, a former journalist from ProPublica and now the editor-in-chief of The Markup, gave a really great interview on privacy last year that I liked and found very encouraging. She said, "I strongly believe that in order to solve a problem, you have to diagnose it, and that we're still in the diagnosis phase of this. If you think about the turn of the century and industrialization, we had, 30 years of child labor, unlimited work hours, terrible working conditions, and it took a lot of journalist muckraking and advocacy to diagnose the problem and have some understanding of what it was, and then the activism to get laws changed. I see my role as trying to make as clear as possible what the downsides are and diagnosing them really accurately so that they can be solvable. That's hard work, and lots more people need to be doing it." And so I found that really encouraging, and that I do think we should be working towards solutions, but I think just at this point, even better diagnosing and understanding kind of the complex problems we're facing is valuable work.
A couple of people are very keen to see your full course on ethics. Is that something that they might be able to attend or buy or something?
So it will be released for free at some point this summer. And it was there was a paid in-person version offered at the Data Institute as a certificate, kind of similar to how this course was supposed to be offered, in person. The data ethics one was in person, and that took place in January and February. And then I'm currently teaching a version for the Masters of Data Science students at USF, and I will be releasing the free online version, later, sometime before July. Thank you. I'll see you next time.